Hello, everybody. I'm Jesse Waters, along with Kayleigh McEnany, Harold Ford Jr., Sandra Smith, and Greg Gutfeld. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. More stupidity and stunning incompetence from California's Democrat leaders as 5 devastating wildfires ravage Los Angeles for a 4th day. Officials somehow finding new ways to make the situation worse after a laundry list of blunders. From L.A. Mayor Karen Bass skipping town to Africa despite knowing her town would burn, to greasy Gavin Newsom faking a phone call with Biden when confronted over why fire hydrants were running out of water. Newsom now calling for an investigation into the water pressure loss. He should also look into this disturbing new report from the L.A. Times that claims a major Pacific Palisades reservoir was offline and empty when the fires broke out. So the last thing people in LA needed was a false panic. But thousands of their phones started buzzing last night with this emergency evacuation alert. Turns out it was an error and meant for people in a different fire warning zone. Top officials then acting totally clueless on how it happened. And like Kamala, they promised to find out the root causes. Watch.
I want to clarify. This is not human-driven. There is no one sitting at a desk right now initiating emergency alerts. As these alerts are being issued, they are not being activated or initiated by a person. We have every technical specialist working to resolve this issue and to find the root cause.
And after that screw up, Gavin Newsom had the gall to lecture people about misinformation.
I ask you, we've got to deal with this misinformation. There were hurricane force winds of mis and disinformation lies. People want to divide this country, and we're going to have to address that as well. And it breaks my heart as people are suffering and struggling.
Please watch your language. And if Californians weren't traumatized enough by all this, marauding gangs of scooter looters are taking advantage. One LA resident claims that 100 people on scooters are roaming evacuated areas as they ransack and loot homes. It's got the California National Guard on the ground to crack down. And Los Angeles is issuing a curfew tonight at 6 local time. Kayleigh, just when you think it can't get any worse, they're scaring the crap out of people with these emergency evacuation order. What did this thing went off for the entire county?
Yeah, it went off apparently once, and then it was going off again and again for many people, according to reports. And then people don't know who to trust. And at this point, how can you trust the government? I mean, we've learned the modus operandi of Democrats. And what is that? It's divert responsibility and point to shiny objects. And divert responsibility, Gavin Newsom was asked by Anderson Cooper 2 days ago, why are the fire hydrants running dry? He said, oh, ask a local official. Could you imagine DeSantis doing that during a hurricane? No, he stepped in, fixed the Pine Island Bridge in 3 days. Gavin Newsom just points to local officials. Then he puts out a letter just moments ago, and the letter says, I'm demanding answers on the water. You're the leader of California. You are the chief executive. And then he goes on with Biden and talks about misinformation. This blew my mind because I remembered the Washington Post story that came out a week ago. Do you want to know Biden's biggest regret? Not Afghanistan, not inflation, not all of his failures. It's not combating misinformation. It's the same line they used after Hurricane Helene when he sat there with Kamala Harris after their failed response. And he said, misinformation, disinformation. That's the playbook. Say misinformation when the hard truth is this. You may have a playbook. The hard truth, progressive leadership fails during times of crisis. East Palestine, Hurricane Helene, this wildfire.
And now there's scooter looters, Sandra, and to think that they could do anything about that when they have this on their hands, it's ludicrous.
This is crazy. There are people dead, okay? They're displaced. They're distraught. There's 2 major images that stood out to me covering this for hours and hours and hours this week, and 2 of them were from today. The video that we played of Gavin Newsom standing in his aviators, taking it from that resident, asking him, Governor, why are the fire hydrants empty? Why were they empty? Why were we not more prepared knowing that these winds were predicted? And then there was the wheelchair that was abandoned along the side of the sidewalk. And you think about that, and you think about whoever was taking care of that person or wherever that person was living. Either they got bad evacuation orders or no evacuation orders at all. Nobody led them to know or understand that this was predicted, that there could be danger coming your way. And then, of course, the failed response to the fires. And those images are going to stick with me. Barry Weiss was with Martha at the top of the 3 o'clock hour. And, you know, Martha simply asked her what she was thinking in that moment. There's no way Gavin Newsom can run for president at this point. Obviously, these have been his ambitions. But to point to the local officials for the problems that those residents are having on the ground right now when he's the governor of the state is a huge problem for Californians.
Hey, Harold, you know a lot of people out in California. Are they proud of their government?
First, good to be with you. No, I think people are deeply concerned. I don't think any of the expressions that have been made, the take on whether it's Democrat or Republican, I don't subscribe to quite as much, but I do subscribe to this has been a failure in many ways on the part of leaders. I think three things. You're always going to have those who are going to want to real time say the accountability and meting out some blame, and that's fine. I think if you're serious about being an elected official and an emergency official during these moments, there are two things you do every time you stand before the public. There are 2 or 3 times a day you do it. The first is you're forthright and candid. 2, in a situation like this, we are running on at the bottom of the screen when we're showing this throughout the day how contained these fires are across the Los Angeles area. The leadership there in Los Angeles ought to be sharing that with us as well. And sharing everything that the fire department is doing, everything that emergency officials are doing to give people confidence that their elected officials and leaders are working to do things, even when information is bad. You have to share with people and say, these are the things we're doing to correct it. 2, lay out all of the resources that people have and where people can find, where they can find support, where they can find help. Greg, we laughed and we're very serious about, in the last day or so, about where people can stay and Greg was serious about asking, are people opening their homes? These are the kinds of things that I think that residents are looking for and leaders are looking for. The real-time accountability, accept it. I mean, I think it is worse when elected officials try to divert blame or, for that matter, try to amplify something that may make themselves look better during a time of crisis like this. The only focus should be on people and meeting the needs of people during an incredibly devastating time. Now, also don't blame. I think that the wind speeds got up to higher levels than they thought, but they've got to assure people, even over the next several days, that they're able to protect and defend people and take care of people because the winds are forecast to pick up over the next several days. And that's what I'm not hearing from the leaders there on the ground.
Yeah, I think we're all just struck by how enormous this is. It just gets worse and worse, Greg.
It's a catastrophe, and there's nothing worse than people who exploit it, except for the scooter looters, because I read that they are just looking for bread because they're hungry. I think it's sad, it's laughable when leaders say, if you loot, you will be arrested, like the mobs that were raiding department stores. And don't you think looters kind of factor into their life choices the chance of arrest? You know, that's part of the game, especially when the word illegal no longer means anything. What a leader has to say is, if you loot, we will shoot you. We will shoot you. And we might come back later to pick you up. But we're in the midst of this catastrophe, one that suspends your usual assumptions about compassion for criminals. Shoot them. Hang them. Show the criminals that this will not be tolerated. That's how it's done. You know, Kayleigh brought this up. In a crisis, Democrats, the modern Democrat seems to be useless because when there is no crisis, they don't prepare for a crisis. Instead, they spend 8 years on silliness. For 8 years, they had their hair on fire about non-existent threats, Trump, climate change, transphobia. And when you have a real fire, when your hair is really on fire, I'm off to Ghana or I'm faking a phone call with the president. And you think about these false alarms. Do you think there'll be any accountability for that? You can't hold people accountable when everybody's incompetent. There is a crisis of competence in this country. It's not just LA. It's New York City with crime. It's New Orleans with terror. It's San Francisco, Los Angeles. And they all have something in common. They replaced real priorities with phony ones. You know, which is, again, fine in a non-crisis world. You can do that stuff. But when a crisis hit, everybody gets punished because you are an incompetent. When they say it's DEI, when I say it's DEI, let's say I say it's DEI, it's not my fault. I can blame the policy because you put the policy forward. You put it in my head. You boasted about it. You talked about equity and inclusion until you were blue in the face. And now when incompetence comes into question, after pushing it so openly, it's our fault to have that thought in our head. DEI is credibility Ozempic. You know when you see an overweight friend and suddenly they lose a ton of weight? Do you attribute it to a gym routine or a low-carb diet? No, you go, that person's on Ozempic. Now, you may be wrong, but because Ozempic is everywhere and talked about, you assume it's Ozempic. It's the same with diversity hires. You know, oh, you see an incompetent minority in a leadership position, you think DEI hire because that's what was sold to you. And it's unfair to that leader because that leader might actually have the qualifications. They might have done it the hard way. But you don't know that because of DEI. The difference between DEI and Ozempic is at least Ozempic works.
Well said, Greg. And
In your face, Harold!
and those scooter looters better watch out.
Shoot them!
Join Fox's support of families impacted by the California wildfires. Your donation enables the Red Cross to respond to and help people recover from this disaster. Visit go.fox/Red Cross to help. Up next, President Trump speaking out in court during his sham sentencing here in New York. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.